It's the week ending Saturday the 30th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen a deadly earthquake in Albania killing at least 30 people, Stormzy causing a surge in UK voter registration, and the death of Australian writer and broadcaster Clive James. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Holly Clements, James Ashford, and for the last time, Cameron Tate.
Yes, indeed.
You've been cancelled, Cam. How 2019? What did you say?
I'm off to go and do some news editing for a new car website that's launching soon.
Pastures New, which is a good trail for your story later, in fact. But first, starting the show this week is Holly. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the new fashion frontier or the emperor's new clothes?
The main question I get is, how do I wear them? What do I do with them? I mean, at the moment, you're only getting, a 3D file, .obj, a project file from Marvelous Designer. So if you don't know any 3D software, you can't really do much with it. So the next step in our existence is, how can we enable people to actually wear digital clothing?
Kerry Murphy from The Fabricant talking at #FashionTechBerlin earlier in the year. My invite got lost in the post. Holly, what is he talking about? And what's The Fabricant?
So there's a new trend in fashion, digital clothing.
Okay.
People are paying lots of money to wear nothing in real life.
What do you mean?
They will send the photograph to a company like The Fabricant, which is a fashion house, but digital only. And those people will design like a 3D beautiful outfit and send you back a picture of you wearing it.
Oh, so it doesn't exist at all?
No.
It's never made?
No.
You get back a photo of you wearing an imaginary garment?
Yes, and this is becoming very popular.
Is it?
There's another fashion house, yes, Carlings. They're doing cheaper options, so it kind of filters down to the common man and woman.
What's a cheaper option in this context?
So The Fabricant, the dress that they sold in May, went for $9,500. A cheaper option is more like £10.
I was going to say, because, Cameron, you write about tech.
I do, yes.
There's presumably an app out there that can put a Prada dress on you for, 5p. So, why would you pay thousands?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use kind of apps that employ something called augmented reality, which is where you have a 3D digital image that is layered onto you in real time, but it's quite primitive and it would look really quite clunky if you were walking around and had this very low resolution dress on you. Whereas something like this is done by professional graphic designers, where they sit down and they will layer this image on you. And it's going to be the most expensive Instagram post that you probably could ever do.
Is that the point then?
I think, yeah, and like Cam says, the apps that exist at the moment, and I think a lot of them are geared towards you buying that outfit in real life after you've tried it on.
But it doesn't exist.
But those ones do,
I
the apps
see.
that exist
Right,
now.
yeah.
Whereas maybe in the future there will be an app or some sort of easier way to access this rather than just going straight through a design house.
But the point at the moment, I'm just trying to understand the point. The point at the moment is you go to the high-end fashion house, you get them to design you a digital garment so that you get back a photo of yourself wearing that garment so that you can post it to your social media looking like you're wearing a bespoke outfit.
Yeah.
And it's the same price as actually going to go and get a suit tailored in the first place, so why don't you just do that?
Those very expensive ones are, yes. But I think also part of it is it's quite new, and the person that bought that very expensive one kind of saw it as an investment, a little bit like cryptocurrency, like you own this dress, even though it's not real. And it's been happening in gaming, Cam will tell you, for years. Like Fortnite makes millions off those kind of imaginary things, but they're real on Fortnite. It's even come out in like Sims. Machino have created clothes for your Sims characters. So it's been around for a while, and I think people that play video games probably get it a bit quicker than you or I might. And I personally see my clothes as keeping me warm, but this is a whole new way of looking at clothes, and I think that's quite common now.
James.
You're
younger than me.
Okay.
I get the avatar thing.
Yes.
I get the Memoji thing or whatever it is, where you personalised a version of yourself and that's the version you want online.
Yes.
But those are cheaper. I don't get the high-end digital version of yourself thing. I just don't get that, do you?
Well, as a very young and cool person, you might think that I think this is a good idea, but actually I think it's a ludicrous gimmick and a load of nonsense, and I disapprove of it wholeheartedly. But I think it's interesting what Holly was saying about the games, because there's this Kim Kardashian Hollywood game, which I saw. It's made $240 million in sales in like 5 years. So I think that tells you everything you need to know.
Money's there. People are going to buy it. I don't doubt that it is going to be a trend. And also, just to argue against your idea that it's ludicrous, it's good for the environment because the fashion industry is really bad for climate change and there's no carbon footprint by wearing imaginary clothes.
She says, laughing. I mean, yeah, okay, that's true, isn't it? Except then the picture of you wearing this beautiful thing might then inspire other people to try and get a real thing that looks like it. You're still advertising effectively what a garment looks like. You're selling clothes.
You could say that every time you walk out the house.
Yeah, but it's a new...
Definitely.
We're all wearing clothes.
Okay,
very well.
I'll put it another way. The people that are spending that much money on their online persona are also going to be spending that money on their real life persona, aren't they? So they're not buying less clothes, are they?
Well, I don't know. If you were on Instagram, I guess the question is how much of your day you spend online and that is your life, you're in a digital world. Like personally, I don't spend very much of my day, so it would be absolutely ludicrous for me to wear digital clothes because I would be naked in real life. So you might as well not have it if you're not on Instagram all day. But if you're a social influencer, maybe this is the next best thing instead of you wearing a one-off outfit, which are kind of, I think that's what inspired Carlings in the first place. People
Cameron, you're
buying
nodding.
those clothes.
You've been nodding the whole way through this.
Yeah.
You think this is perfectly sensible, don't you?
I'm kind of like, let's go 70-30 in favour of digital clothes because, as Holly was saying, I think it's going to be great for potentially reducing fashion's carbon footprint, which is diabolical. I was reading some research that over the year we'll be wasting 235 million items of clothing, which is absolutely ridiculous. All of that will be going into a landfill. So while digital clothing will hopefully reduce this, it's not a case of everyone's going to be going out and buying a dress that costs $9,000. It's kind of one of these things of where technology filters down, and if it makes its way down into fast fashion, because a lot of people will go out and they'll, let's say if it's one night, they'll go out, they'll go and buy a certain shirt or a certain dress for that one night to get photographed, to go up on Instagram, and then the next day it's useless.
Yeah, but they still have to wear something that evening. That's the bit I don't understand.
Yeah, but if you could wear just something quite generic, it kind of doesn't really matter what you're wearing there. It's a lot of people do this. I was at an event, have a look at me and have a look at this thing that I was at.
I mean, what you're saying is what you're doing in real life is now less important than what your social media life is doing. And that may be true for some people, but that is a damning indictment of where we've got to, isn't it?
Yeah, slightly. I wouldn't say that's a fact, but I would say that that's probably a fair observation to say that we value our online life absolutely massively.
So, I mean, if you filter this down, what it means is 16-year-olds going to the prom at their school will turn up wearing a green screen T-shirt in real life, but then they'll get the photo to look like they're wearing a Versace tux. That's what we're saying.
I certainly
Is that a good
so.
place to be?
I find this all very upsetting. And also, there's no way that people are going to say, okay, I'm not going to go to Primark or H&M. I'm going to go and spend $9,500 on a dress. I just feel like no one's going to be doing that. It's going to be a gimmick. It'll be a flash in the pan. Maybe, I think I can see the point of fashion houses doing it. So if you're a fashion house and you want to kind of say, look, this is what we can do. This is what our designers are up to. And we might make this stuff real in the future. Great. But then I think people aren't going to realistically spend real money on fake clothes for themselves.
Then you look at like how gaming culture has influenced Facebook and vice versa. And that does have a real world impact on how people run their businesses, how people value themselves in life, you know, how many followers they have, whether they've connected with people on LinkedIn or whatever. All of that does use the kind of reward mechanics that we have endorphin-wise from playing games, doesn't it? It's not inconceivable. It's just
It's a terrifying
unpleasant.
Black Mirror future where we're all sitting at home naked and we're dressed in these beautiful clothes on the internet. And one positive that I would say is quite exciting from an artistic point of view. I think for these 3D modelers, they can do anything, which for fashion designers over the years, they've done all these great things on the catwalk, but you can literally go anywhere with this and do anything, the fabrics that you can create and all the things that you couldn't do in real life. That must be quite exciting if you are a fashion designer.
I'm just going to adjust this beautiful red chiffon number that I'm wearing. And James, you're up next after this. Okay, James, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Whether boots, bombs and bullets still have a place in today's nuclear-armed world.
It won't be little green men next time. And when you think about how difficult it is in this era of constant competition, where there is this grey area between peace and war, the first hostile act is going to be very difficult to recognise. And when, as a young officer, I sat in my trench on the West German plain, it was very clear to me what that first hostile act would have looked like. And I always imagined a soldier from the Soviet Union with wire cutters cutting the fence before his tank drove through it. It's not going to be like that next time.
General Nick Carter talking about dynamic security threats and the British Army for RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. James, what's the story?
Well, there was new research from the Institute this week that found that the British Army, along with our NATO allies, would have a critical shortage of artillery and ammunition in the unlikely event that we go to war with Russia.
And Russia specifically because they've got a big army and lots of munitions.
They've got a pretty big army and lots of munitions that can shoot quite long distances, and ours are not so good at that, unfortunately.
But you mentioned NATO. Surely being outgunned by Russia would only really be significant, even in the unlikely event that we personally, as a country, went to war with Russia if we weren't part of NATO, but we are. We've got other countries to help us.
I think being part of NATO is what I would describe as quite a big relief. It's probably also quite a big relief for other members of NATO, like Montenegro, who spend about $92 million a year on their defence spending. When you compare that to kind of US spending, who are the biggest defence spenders in the whole world, they actually outspend the rest of NATO combined on their own. So I think being in NATO is pretty good for us. It gives us some friends.
But when it comes to spending, Holly, that's where there's been a big debate, hasn't there, even amongst British forces, members of the service personnel themselves, because some will say we need more troops, we should be spending more on that, we should be spending more on things like guns. Others would agree that having put resources into things like cybersecurity, that's more worthwhile. That's actually more relevant to fighting Russia, actually.
Yeah, and I think there's the public problem. You only have to look at the general election manifestos to see there's not much in them about defence. And I think that's because it's not very popular among the public. It's not a priority for us when we're voting. Whereas if you look in Russia, where perhaps their press isn't so free, they're giving out lots of perhaps disinformation about how the West is a big threat, which is quite different to our general public.
Why is this your story of the week, James? Why do you think it's important?
I think it poses the questions, is the British military fit for purpose, and are conventional forces still relevant in a world where security and defence challenges have changed massively? You're just mentioning there the challenge from cyber. There's obviously the nuclear element now to diplomatic, political and defence considerations. There's terrorism. But I think that ultimately the army and the military in general in Britain is fit to do the job it's doing now, but it might not be fit to do a job against Russia should that ever happen.
Cameron, let's put that to you. Is the British Army fit for purpose?
By itself, and if we were facing Russia, then absolutely not, no. In fact, we're actually seeing quite a lot of people that are leaving the army. So last year, 8,000 people left the army. When they did a survey on it, it appears that morale is quite low at the moment and people aren't really wanting to sign up. So I don't think we are fit for purpose if we're talking about ground combat. And I was half expecting, with the B word, Brexit, happening, we would have a little bit more kind of national pride going on, and I thought people would kind of want to be signing up for the army. But we're kind of seeing the reverse.
Well, actually, I haven't seen. I looked at some of those stats, and I thought there has actually been an increase this year in people signing up to join the armed forces, because there was that campaign, wasn't there, sort of targeting millennials, saying if you're a gamer, we need you, and all this kind of thing. If you're a snowflake, we need you. It's just that, as you say, there's been this huge number of people dropping out. But again, is that possibly, arguably, evidence of a strategy working? They're changing the armed forces to reflect different skills.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that lower numbers definitely means that we're doing better or kind of developing in the right direction. But you've also got to look at what kind of war that we're talking about. Russia's had practice, if you will, in Ukraine and Syria, whereas we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan as American troops as well, which is a completely different kind of war. It's counterinsurgency and stabilising countries. So it really depends what kind of war Russia might bring out in us and whether they would win that, because they've obviously got advantages depending on how they would do it.
Yeah, and the report you were mentioning, James, references the UK either retaining a sufficient stockpile of anti-armour and high explosive munitions or, quote, reconsidering its commitments to the Oslo Treaty and procuring cluster munitions. What does that mean?
Well, I think that we're not going to be doing that anytime soon. I know that Russia and the US, they are not members of that treaty, so they are, I guess, free to use cluster munitions if they want to.
What is a cluster munition?
A bomb that goes off in many different directions once it's over the sky. Sometimes they fall onto the ground and they're like duds, so they're kind of like landmines once they've fallen. They caused lots of shrapnel problems, they've hurt civilians, that's kind of why they're very unpopular.
So what has the reaction to the report been?
I think the reaction has been trying to kind of answer those questions about whether actually the British military is fit for purpose now that we've seen that there might be this critical shortage of artillery and ammunition. I think that one of the key findings from that report was that we couldn't maintain a credible defence position in Eastern Europe were we to get into conflict with Russia. But I just think that that's probably not actually one of the questions that we need to be considering at the moment. And whilst the army is basically essentially a war-fighting organisation, I think we need to look at the other things it does, which is international humanitarian work, like when it went over to Africa to help with the Ebola crisis, domestic civil work, helping with the floods recently, training, Afghanistan, Iraq, bomb disposal, intelligence, anti-poaching. It does a lot of things. It is primarily a war-fighting organisation, but it's not just a war-fighting organisation. And it is just one tool at the disposal of politicians and diplomats who also have the nuclear deterrent. They have our diplomatic action with other countries, and they have our intelligence capability.
It's interesting, isn't it, that because Holly was saying that the general public don't think much about the armed forces, and that might be because when they think about them, okay, it might be in vaguely positive terms, like helping when a village gets flooded, but it's not in defending our country, because we haven't done a lot of that.
What General Carter says in that speech, actually, that was just played, he says, our whole generation's become used to wars of choice. So we've gone in and decided to go into those wars. But he says that might not be an option with Russia, which is quite a scary thought. But that might be much closer to the kind of World War I, World War II, where we're forced to play a part in it rather than making a choice, which is way more of a political decision. And it would obviously kind of feed into politicians having to explain why we're going to war. It would be a lot easier to defend if our borders and our country was actually at risk.
And the NATO thing's kind of crucial to all this, isn't it? Which was sort of my instinctive reaction to this. The problem with NATO at the moment is the US has, clearly made it very obvious that they're not so keen these days.
Absolutely, and you've had Macron recently saying that it's a failing organisation and things like that. They're celebrating
brain dead, he said.
Brain dead, right? Yeah, I mean, I think they're coming up to 70 years now as the alliance. But with everybody doubting it, you kind of wonder what the future is. I think it's pretty crucial for our interests as a country, but also as Europe, to make sure that NATO remains strong. I don't think that the US would seriously consider leaving, but it's a prospect that you kind of have to consider.
So the significance, I think, is that the warfare system is fundamentally changing, and we're maybe not equipped to deal with that. And Russia, it seems to be ahead because it's so flexible with conventional warfare, unconventional warfare, nuclear warfare, as James says, but maybe we're lagging behind.
But that comes down to budget as well, doesn't it? Russia is flexible because they put a lot of money into their armed forces. We don't. And actually, we see those stories, don't we? Aircraft hangars that are out of date by the time they're commissioned and all this kind of thing. We'd have to put loads more money in if we wanted to be as flexible as them.
I think we simply don't have the budget or the population numbers to try and match Russia for spending or for number of military personnel. But I think that's one of the reasons that we're part of NATO. The US does have the population, it does have the budget. They spend twice as much as Russia. And the whole point of NATO is it's this international military alliance. It has a collective defence. So the purpose of it is that we would stick up for countries like Ukraine, and they would do the same for us were it to ever come to that.
And on that bombshell, literally, Cameron, your final story after this. And so finally, for his final appearance ever on The Week Unwrapped, it's Cameron. What are you going out on?
It's the hot new trend that'll put you in a good mood.
This headset allows anyone to create their own environment. If one is feeling stressed, they can load into a natural environment for 10 minutes and relax. If one is feeling energetic, they can expel energy in a fitness game. These are like the new rules to this reality I've thrown myself in. Everything is in the headset.
YouTuber Disrupt talking about spending a week in a VR headset. Cameron, what's the story? It's not about him.
Well, have I got a doozy to end my last episode. This week, a Russian farmer...
Significant news with impact for all our lives.
For all our lives.
Yeah.
We joke, but this could genuinely have one, which is why it's on the Week Unwrapped podcast. This week, a Russian farmer decided to put VR headsets on his cows in an attempt to reduce their anxiety.
And this has significant impact for all our lives. Why?
So the idea is, basically, the Russian agriculture and food ministry basically says there is a link between cow anxiety and stress and milk production. And the idea is that if you have a happy cow, you have a cow that's more likely to produce more milk, be more efficient. Which
you
kind
might
of
think a happy cow would be one that was in a field with the ability to roam around.
Well, that's not always the case because the seasons change. It can be cold. It can be miserable. You look at the countryside on a summer's day, it's gorgeous. But when you go at the end of autumn, it's grey and muddy and dreary.
Yourself in the brain of a cow now.
You have to be a good journalist, you have to do these
Sure.
things. So what the VR headset does is it actually displays an image or a video of green, luscious fields and blue skies. And perhaps birds tweeting, who knows?
Okay. Is there any science behind this, or is this just a Russian farmer put a VR headset on a cow and you've brought it to our attention as your news story of the week?
Well, like I said, the Russian Ministry of Agriculture and Food says there is some science behind it.
But we haven't seen it.
This is the start of the experiment. So do we know that for sure? Not really. We joke about this, but we shouldn't really underestimate technology's effect on the agriculture industry. In fact, it's one of the most technologically advanced industries that we have. So while making a cow happier through VR is probably not the most realistic way of improving animal welfare, technology is having a massive impact on animal welfare. For instance, we use technology trackers to monitor animal health. So if you've got a pig farm, you've got hundreds of pigs in one area, it's quite difficult to track perhaps which ones are healthy and which ones might have some issues. Whereas when we use technology, we can find if one of them is coughing and we can go and help them out. I don't know how it's done in the agriculture industry. Technology can also be used in the slaughter process. Basically, from what I understand, you can have automated door systems and you can do basically mass stunnings through technology without basically having one person to go up to each animal and slaughter them individually.
And we are seeing, as we've discussed on this show before, a trend in the developed world towards vegetarianism and veganism. I mean, perhaps using that kind of technology as a way of reassuring people who are on the fence, who can't decide whether or not they want to go fully meat-free, that actually, you know, there are welfare improving technologies out there that are making farming better all the time from an animal welfare point of view. Do you think we'll be seeing more of this kind of thing?
I hope we will. It's certainly encouraging that farmers are considering the welfare of animals a bit more, although it is kind of quite depressing that instead of just letting cows go and live in lovely green fields, we're just putting headsets on them so they can imagine living in lovely green fields.
And it's not really for their welfare, this is. It's about producing more milk. They say it's quantifiably more milk by the cow being relaxed.
Well, exactly. There was actually a thing, I think it was a satirical thing 5 years ago, though it was presented very straight by an Iowa State University assistant professor called Austin Stewart, who hatched this plan to bring virtual headsets to chickens, which would have virtual grass, virtual bugs, virtual chickens to interact with, and even virtual food. The chickens would then be placed on a multi-directional treadmill and have the headset put on them. He described it as second livestock, which I think is a hilarious pun. It's also been described as Oculus Rift.
But the thing is, though, I spoke to a virtual reality developer once, and I was saying to her, you know, VR hasn't taken off, has it? Everyone was saying it was the future, and it isn't. You don't see people walking around with headsets. She was actually really angry at me because she said that's a really narrow definition of what VR is. VR isn't about putting on a headset. You know, if you go on a theme park ride at Universal Studios, that's VR. Creating a world around you that isn't the world you're in at the time, that's VR technology. And the stuff that gets the press headlines is when a cow puts on an Oculus Rift. But actually, the idea of improving environments for animals by changing the atmosphere around them through a range of different tips and tricks, that's sensible, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you might have nailed it when you said it's not really for the cow's welfare. Like, you can imagine someone thinking, I'll just stick them in a barn and make sure they've just got their VR headset on for the rest of their lives without having to take them out. So I guess there's pros and cons if it actually took off. I'm not convinced this story isn't fake news, but even if it's not, I mean, it has proven, human beings say that it reduces anxiety. So I don't think the VR headset itself is not a bad thing for mental health. People have said how it's helped them. They can kind of switch off from the world and look at their own rolling fields. But whether you want your cows to be wearing one is a whole nother world.
I think we could kind of get ourselves into a bit of a rabbit hole in thinking that farmers are going to go around and start putting VR headsets on their cows. I don't think that's the point of this experiment. It's basically to see whether improving animal welfare will improve productivity. And if you were to do this is going to sound a little bit ridiculous as well, but you could probably...
Now it's going to sound ridiculous?
But you could probably, to go on to what you were saying of where VR isn't necessarily just what's on a headset, and that's why it's a VR headset and not just a VR device. You could have basically a room of where you've kind of got 360-degree screen going around you, displaying perhaps lush green fields, and that might be better than shoving a cow into a real field.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of thing I was talking about. And that does
Yeah.
kind of make sense, doesn't it? I mean, that sounds ridiculous to some people, but animals do get anxiety and depression. We're animals, all animals do. And taking them into an environment that is less depressing than the one they're in might help.
You can also piggyback off that, of what you were just saying there. You could actually apply this to humans as well. So we're kind of looking at animal welfare. We are animals as humans, and it really wouldn't surprise me if we get to a point in the relatively near future of where we do just go, I'm in a really bad place at the moment, or I'm going through a tough time in life. You could just literally resign yourself to a VR or a virtual world.
Or give yourself a little 20-minute meditative boost of it. I suppose that's the point, isn't it? I mean, that, again, you could imagine that being quite useful. If you find your life depressing, here's 20 minutes of something completely different.
I don't think that we think of reading books or watching TV
Exactly.
or playing video games as too problematic. So it's just an extension of that, isn't it? A bit of escapism. But I did do...
So long as no one's milking you at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. I mean, it depends what you watch on the VR headset, I suppose. I did some research actually last night thinking about this story, and I kind of just looked at videos of dogs, cats and chimpanzees with VR headsets on them. So I'll just give you a quick run through. Dogs, bored, quite boring video to watch, disappointing overall. Cats did interact with the video. They looked quite frightened, and I was worried that they weren't having a good time. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, were loving it. They used a headset, and they even had the handheld bit, which can go with it, and they were popping balloons and having a wonderful time. So I think if chimpanzees can enjoy it, and we can enjoy it, why can't cows?
I guess the question is, how do you know that? How do we know, apart from like serotonin levels or whatever it is that they've tested to see that the cows like it, what is going through their little minds when they've suddenly had this big computer screen stuck on their head?
It's a lot for them to understand.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we've given my cat an automatic cat feeder in the last week, and literally it's 7 days of training to get her to understand that her microchip opens the flap. It's a lot for an animal to understand, isn't it? We've created a virtual world. It's delivered in electronic form. We need to plug you in.
And also, how long will it take for some rogue farmhand to go onto the computer and swap out the nice green field video for that of a roller coaster?
I don't think the cows do need to understand what's going on, though. I think that the magic of not understanding makes it even better. Because if you think about when you saw a magic trick as a kid, you just thought, oh, that's real magic, that's wonderful. Now you know it's not real magic, it's so disappointing. If you could stick a VR headset on me and convince me it was real, bingo, I'm happy.
It's interesting how journalists are less cynical when the story originates in a foreign language country, Holly, don't you think?
Less cynical?
Yeah.
They just called it fake news.
Yeah, but exactly. You called it fake news, but if it was in the UK, there would be a lot more investigation into, is this just a photo of a cow wearing a VR headset that's gone viral on the internet? And what's the reason for it? Is it promoting the VR company? Is it promoting the farm? Because it's from Russia and it's in Russian, people just like, haha, funny picture of a cow, and then just taking everything else around the story at its word.
I give The Verge credit. The Verge have been questioning it. They've
Have
been
they?
trying to look into it,
And
investigate.
what's the
They've had
conclusion?
no answer. They've been trying to contact everyone to check if it's real.
The cow had no comment.
no comment.
Well, Cameron, that was a swan song of exact magnitude to your contributions to the podcast.
I'd say I like to think that over the last 3 years, I've given our listeners kind of some of the more lighter stories, and I thought I'd end it on a very, very serious note.
He's really milking it now.
I must just ask, Cameron, before we let you go forever, for long-term fans of the podcast, did you ever get your test drive with Tesla?
We keep coming back to this. I test drove a Tesla. That was the first car I test drove on this job was a Tesla. So yes, I did test drive a Tesla. I haven't test driven a Tesla since I drove the Model S in 2017.
What's on your list? What's the thing you really want to do that you haven't been able to do?
The car that I would absolutely love to drive. Well, the ultimate career ambition is to drive a Formula 1 car.
Yeah, that's a hard sell to the PR people. That's quite a valuable piece of estate that you'd be driving around there, and they probably don't need your review.
Well, I was in a I was in a virtual reality headset on a Formula 1 simulator the other day, so I'm not terrible, providing that the real thing is exactly the same as the computer game.
Did it improve your mental well-being?
I was very happy until I took the headset off.
I won't ask if you were producing more milk. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Cameron Tate and to Holly Clements and James Afshred. For the full amusing back catalogue, just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice and hit subscribe. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer was Sarah Miles at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week. Bye-bye.